Boing! Who doesn't want a very silly, very neon colored, very rave party ready Space Marine Captain with a jump pack who can just bounce around on the tabletop, right? I know at least I wanted one, so that's why I painted it. And in this video, I'm going to show you how I did it. So I started off with a model that looked quite a little bit more, well, not neon colored. As you can see here, I started off with a model that's been primed using the White Scars primer from Citadel. And then I painted basically half of it with a red contrast paint, and this one is called Bal Red, which is one of the newer contrast paints, and it's one of those that has like a single pigment in it. So that means it doesn't give you the whole contrast feel that some of the other contrast paints do, but on the other hand, it gives you a more even coverage. So if you want to use it on armor plates, that's probably one of the better ones to go for. Then I grabbed another one, and this one is a turquoise color, and it's called Croxagore Scales. It has more of the contrasting look, as you can tell, and so it'll be a little bit more uneven when it dries, but I'm going to be covering the entire surface with textures anyway, so I don't really care. I decided on red and turquoise next to each other because I thought they would be great contrasting colors and also just, well, look fun. I then started to add in the shadows on the red parts of the armor, and for that I used some snakebite leather, which is also a contrast paint, mixed in just with a slight touch of black paint because the snakebite on its own was just a little bit too light, so you couldn't really tell the cross-hatching patterns that I'm painting on here. You could absolutely also do this color scheme with more ordinary techniques of shading and highlighting, but I just like the cross-hatching. I think it looks fun and makes the whole thing look just a little bit more graphic and visually interesting. And also, I'm not quite patient enough to do many layers of smooth blending over an entire model like this. So yeah, cross-hatching it is. For the turquoise armor, I shaded that with a bit of Pterodon turquoise, which is a darker turquoise color than the Croxagore Scales. For the first layer of highlights on the turquoise part of the armor, I mixed up some Blaster Blue with some Gamma Green. Both are fluorescent paints from Huge Miniatures, and if you want to get some, you can grab some at a discount. I have a link and a discount code in the description below. And I mixed up these two because I wanted to have a turquoise highlight that would also be, well, glow in the dark, or well, glow under a UV light, and I didn't have any on hand, so I just mixed it up myself. For the second layer of highlight, I am using Quantum Green, which is also a fluorescent paint from Huge Miniatures, and you can see I tried to touch on some of the areas that I had already highlighted with the first highlight color, and I do this to make sure that the transition between the colors are sort of more gradual than if I just made a sudden transition and none of the colors touch each other. On the other hand, this is just a piece I'm painting for fun, so I don't want to spend like ages doing it. So I try to be relatively careful while at the same time doing something that I can realistically finish within a day or two. The last layer of highlights is also from Huge Miniatures, and it's called Starfire Yellow, and it's just a really nice vibrant yellow color. For the red armor, the first layer of highlights is also with the paint from Huge Miniatures. You'll notice a trend here. I really like fluorescent paints on minis. I think they look fun, and I just really think it's cool that they will glow under a UV light. And the color I'm using here is called Radar Red, and it's because it's a fluorescent paint, it is a little bit more pale and not quite as saturated as other red colors are. But I think as a highlight color, it works really well here and really does the job that I wanted to do. Next up, I grabbed some laser orange, and I use that as the second layer of highlights. And again, you'll notice I sort of highlighted the entire thing with the Radar Red first, and then I go back over it with the laser orange to try and make sure that it looks just like I have a little bit of blending going on without actually spending hours doing something that would be completely smooth. For the last layer of highlights, I also use the Starfire Yellow again, and I do this both because it will add a nice touch to the red armor and also to tie it into the turquoise parts of the armor, because when you use the same last highlight, it'll just make it look just slightly more harmonious than it does right now when it looks, well, quite chaotic. I then thought that was actually quite nice to sort of try and tie the two parts of the armor together, and so I decided to do a an edge highlight with the highlight colors from the opposite side. So I'm doing first here the laser orange for the turquoise part of the armor, and then a last layer of highlights for the sort of the trim or whatever you want to call it, again with the starfire yellow, which will be then a recurring theme on all parts of the armor panels. And I just think it helps make sure that everything looks like it's a little bit more sort of meant to be than it might otherwise do. Then for the trim on the red parts of the armor, I use a color called Gamma Green, which is a little bit, just slightly more saturated, a little bit darker than the Quantum Green I used as the highlight color on the turquoise parts of the armor. And that's simply because I found when I used the lighter green color, it was a little bit difficult to tell that it was a green color up against all the red. And I really wanted to make sure that that would stand out and be visible. And then lastly, of course, I add just a touch of the Starfire yellow. Then for the parts of the armor that I would usually paint in a metallic color, such as gold or silver, I decided I wanted instead to just have another bright color, and so I painted them purple because I wanted something that would stand out both from the red and the turquoise, and then I thought purple was the way to go, and the color I'm using is called Luxion Purple, and it's a contrast paint from Citadel. Then this is a little bit hard to tell, but his cape I also painted with the Luxion Purple, and then I shaded it with more of the Pterodon Turquoise that I also used for the turquoise parts of the armor. And I painted it again, as you can see, with the cross-hatching technique that I also used on the armor. For the first layer of highlights, I actually decided not to use a fluorescent color, but I chose one that is called Warlock Purple, that is from Vallejo, and it's a little bit difficult to see here, but I just thought it was necessary to have an in-between color between the purple contrast paint and the brighter fluorescent highlights. Then for the first layer of the fluorescent highlights, I am using a color called Pulse Wave Pink, which is also from Huge Miniatures. I decided that I also wanted to do the exact same colors on the sort of metallic parts of the armor that are now no longer metallic, and so I used the exact same colors there. The last layer of highlights on the purple/pink parts of the model were painted with a color from Huge Miniatures that is called Cyber Pink. And usually I would actually add another set of highlights with just a bit of white mixed in. But I thought since the rest of the model was just so very bright and saturated, it would look perhaps a little bit off to add some white. So I just chose to end it with this layer of highlights. It felt a little bit weird doing it, but I think it was the right choice. And I mean, I gotta say, while I was painting this, I just had so much fun just adding in all these weird colors. Then I decided that since this model is supposed to look like it's flying, I wanted to make sure it had a very wobbly stand to just make it look even more silly and look like it's a little bit in motion, so to speak. So I grabbed a piece of steel wire and I wound it around an old brush to make a spiral. And I just clipped it off and made sure it had more or less the right length. The reason why I make it into a spiral is just both because I think it looks like cool and fun, and also because it makes it just a little bit stronger and sturdier, and the jump pack model is actually a little bit heavy for a model this size. So I thought that like just a straight piece of steel wire would probably not be able to hold him aloft. It would just... I thought he might just fall over, which is, I mean, that would also be silly and also kind of fun, but after all, not quite the effect I was going for. Then I painted the steel wire with a bit of typhus corrosion to make it just look like it was slightly painted. Instead of just the raw steel wire, I thought that would look a little bit out of place. And I had to wait until it dried, and I didn't quite have the patience for that, but more or less. And then dry brushed it with a bit of orange paint to make it look like it's some sort of rusty metal that would be sticking out of the ground. Once I was happy with that, there was nothing left to do but to glue the wire thing in place. I had no way of controlling whether or not this was actually strong enough to support the model, so I just glued it in place and hoped for the best. And then I could finally glue the model onto the spring, and I had to sit perfectly still for quite some time to make sure that it was actually firmly attached to the spring. It tested my patience quite a bit. I'm not very patient, but I mean, I really wanted it to be a wobbly, bouncy model, so I was willing to actually try it out and do the best I could. And it's a little bit, I'm sorry for the shaky footage, guys, but I had to hold the camera in my hand while also trying to bounce around with the model. But here you can see the final result, and it was just, it looks so silly. And the spring is slightly, well, it's not quite as strong as I would have liked it to be. I should have wound it up a little bit more tightly, I think. But it works, and he will stay like this, both under a normal light and under a UV light, as you also saw at the beginning of the video. I actually considered not doing this because he does come, after all, with the rock that he can sort of jump off from, and that looks great as well. But it was just too much fun and too silly not to do. And these last few photos you see here are of him before I did the spring. I actually had him attached to the rock at first and then decided to go with the spring, and I think that was definitely the more silly but also more fun option, and so I'm really happy I did that. So that was what I wanted to show you today, guys. But before you leave, I hope you will just allow me to take the opportunity to thank the wonderful people who support Dice and Demons over on Patreon. So thank you so much to Thomas Madsen, Scott Broadway, Gwenna L, Queen's Wolf, Double J's Terrain, Mola Mola, TJ Kubiak, Mando Project, Starcon85, S Beer, Echinocicus, Firelord21, and Elliot Philby. If you would like to join these wonderful people in supporting Dice and Demons, you can do so over on Patreon, and I will leave a link to that in the show notes. Also, remember that you can follow me as Dice and Demons over on X, formerly known as Twitter, and Instagram if you want to stay up to date on my painting projects. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions for future videos or other such things, you are more than welcome to leave a comment in the comment section, and I'll do my very best to get back to you. It would also mean the world to me if you would consider liking the video, subscribing to my channel, or perhaps even sharing my videos with your friends. It really helps a lot. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!